Hello and good evening. My name is Kristen Rogers. I am the chair of the Harwood Unified Union School District. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us this evening. Sorry. We start each meeting with public comment. Anyone from the public can speak on a school board related matter they would like to. Each speaker is given up to 3 minutes. Usually we are able to hear from everyone that would like to speak. If for some reason there are more speakers than time allows, I will draw names. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will let you know you have 30 seconds left. And at the 3 minute mark, I will let you know your time is up so we can go on to the next speaker. If you have more to share than 3 minutes allows, we invite you to email the entire board at cen-huusd@huusd.org. Please know that while the board does not respond during public comment, we do always listen carefully to what is being said. If you are on Zoom and would like to speak, please click on the raised hand button now. I'm going to give just a second. Brian, I do see you. Just 1 second. I wasn't quite together. I just got to get my timer. 1 second. Usually I'm on top of it. 1 second. Usually I'm on top of it. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now, Brian.
All right, got it. So first, I want to thank the members of the Restraint and Exclusion Committee and volunteering your time for that. So I wanted to read something quickly and then speak about it from an article that was published by the United States Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and it's titled, "The Dangerous Use of Seclusion and Restraints in Schools Remains Widespread and Difficult to Remedy." The article discusses the halo effect, which is a well-documented social psychology phenomenon that causes people to be biased in their judgments by transferring their feelings about one attribute of something to another, unrelated attributes. In the cases of restraint exclusion, the article states, even if there is strong evidence of psychological injury, many parents and advocates reported difficulty in overcoming the cultural bias in favor of teachers and school systems. In many parts of the country, teachers are viewed as beyond reproach, much like doctors, police officers, or clergy. In some cases, this means that actions that would be considered criminal if committed by a parent remain unchallenged by law enforcement if they occur in a school setting. In fact, federal regulations govern the use of seclusion and restraint in virtually every type of institution, including hospitals, nursing homes, and psychiatric facilities, but none apply to schools. So with that said, I encourage the board to consider biased opinions when listening to the school district and revise the restraint and seclusion policy based on the latest research, none of which supports the use of prone restraints, supine restraints, or seclusion. If an entire state can prohibit their use, including specialized out-of-district schools in those states, why can't we? Harwood's population is not unique. In fact, Harwood does not train staff to use prone restraints. Prone restraints are performed by Washington County Mental Health. The board subcommittee asked great questions in their first meeting. It was stated that the majority of restraints are performed by contracted service providers. If I were on the committee, I would ask Washington County Mental Health about what research or evidence supports their use of prone restraints. Based on what we know about the halo effect, it's dangerous to simply trust their judgment about this dangerous technique without any evidence to back it up. Ask them why they use it when entire states have prohibited prone restraints. Yes.
Kristen, or can you hear? I can't hear you.
Yeah, Cindy, we can hear you. Go ahead, Brian.
I can't hear you. Okay.
So I would ask Washington County Health why they use it, despite the evidence that doesn't support it. Even jails in Minnesota have banned prone restraints, except in cases where lethal force is authorized. So I want you all to think about that. Lethal force. And that's in jail. Aside from the obvious psychological dangers, I expect that a mental health agency would know the psychological injuries that result from the use of prone restraints. Instead, when I worked for Brookside, I called them therapeutic. Even though it's Washington County Mental Health that performs the prone restraints, it's up to the school board to create a policy to prohibit their use. Another question I would ask is, what training does Harwood provide on the use of seclusion? I'm not aware of any. Has anyone in the school been trained on the use of seclusion? If the answer is yes, ask for the details. What research supports the use of seclusion? Again, I'm not aware of any. All we know is that the state of Vermont allows it, while several others do not. So I ask again, please prohibit prone restraint, supine restraints, and seclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing anybody else for public comment. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to approving the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Mike Bishop made the motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second? Okay. Any objection?
Could I make a motion to amend? I'd like to make a motion to add to the agenda, to the discussion portion, a 20-minute discussion about mitigation of respiratory illnesses and COVID. As voted on at the last meeting, I've been told that it's been scheduled for January, that's not firm, or that is firm. So to me, the spirit of the discussion last time was that we would address it sooner than that so that we can move on.
No. Okay, it's not buzzing. Just 1 second while we get this motion up, and then we'll be looking for a second.
Motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, just 1 second. We'll get the wording up to make sure it's correct.
Add a discussion item about mitigation of respiratory illnesses, including COVID, as voted on at the last meeting. 20 minutes at the end of the discussion section. Sorry.
On Zoom, guys, we're just getting the wording correct, so it'll just take 1 second before we bring that up and screen share.
To add a discussion item regarding, maybe instead of to add mitigation of respiratory illnesses, respiratory and airborne illnesses, I think is the way we had it, including COVID. As voted on at the last meeting. For 20 minutes at the end of the discussion section to tonight. Is it just better in the future to have it typed and I can email it like we did that one time? Okay. Thank you.
Still doing the wording, so just 1 second, and then we'll screen share it so everybody can see.
At the end of the discussion section of tonight's meeting. Near the end for 20 minutes at the end of the discussion section. Whew. Love that back button. 20 minutes at the end of, discussion section.
Just 1 second, Cindy. We're just getting wording and then looking, bringing it up to make sure it's correct, and then we'll have discussion because it was seconded.
Thank you. Sorry, it's awkward to let dictate. I appreciate you getting that down.
Okay, so Cindy, I saw your hand first, if you would like to go ahead.
I would just like to say maybe for up to 20 minutes. I don't think we have to talk about it for 20 minutes if the discussion doesn't need to go that far.
Does anybody have any other discussion on the motion? I just want. Okay, go ahead. Microphone.
I have a question of if the reason it was delayed till January was so that Mike and the head nurse could gather data and plans.
The rationale for January was where it fit in to the agenda with the agenda planning. Any other questions? Zoom land.
Can I just notice, I see that tonight our agenda runs till 8 o'clock, which I think is the earliest of any that I've seen. So it feels like a good night for it. We did have several people mention the urgency. I think somebody, Lisa, had said, should we put a time on it? Tori was asking, is it going to work at the next meeting? I guess it's lesson learned to put a time on it if we think that the urgency makes sense. But I do think timeliness is important here. If there was, like Tori had said, if there was a reason to wait because of allowing people to prepare or something like that, totally for that. January being the very end of the agenda ad cycle, it seems like rather than a near future meeting, that was kind of the farthest. We did have, 7-3 vote last time. There seemed to be will to talk about it. We want to get a plan in place before the winter. We've had several members of the public contact us and ask us to act. And I think we could have a decent discussion pretty quickly.
I wouldn't want to have a discussion about COVID that I hadn't carefully thought about and prepared for, and I didn't do that today. I also wonder, I don't think we should be making assumptions that we are going to put a plan in place. We have not made that decision, and I wouldn't support that. I would support following the Department of Health's guidelines. So I don't think we should talk about it as an add-on. I don't think that's appropriate for other people who might want to think about things and do reading or talk to others, or maybe I'd like to hear from our own healthcare staff before, I just don't think we're qualified to be doing this. None of us are healthcare professionals except for Kristen. So, and I don't think, and I don't think any of us are public health officials. So I don't think that would be an appropriate last minute addition to an agenda.
Lisa, go ahead. I saw your hand next.
I agree that ideally we would have had it on the agenda and had time to prepare, but if the options are either tonight or January, I would agree with tonight as the better option. And it does sound like we have time on our agenda to fit that in before the 8:30 time that we usually end at. I do think it's important and it's timely. I mean, this is, if it's important enough to talk about, it's important enough to talk about in November, not January, as that's when we can make a difference in this season of illness.
I wonder if, sorry.
Is there anybody? Go ahead, Jonathan.
I kind of agree with both Lisa and everybody else. It seems like we should talk about it. We have the time. We should do it. At the same time, I think that discussion may include, hey, we want to hear from some officials. We want to, talk about that as, what we want to know is what we'll discuss tonight. So I think it could help to determine whether or not we want to have some people come in and talk to us about these items that we have questions about. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't just entertain that discussion tonight.
Any other questions, comment?
I guess I do have a question. I know that typically there's a discussion in one meeting before there's any action taken in latter meetings, and not to presuppose that there would be action taken, like Kim said, we don't know. But I'm just wondering how that process works, because we had a vote to add it as a discussion item. It sounds like maybe having a quick discussion tonight and then another one or at some point, or maybe the group will decide. So what happens between discussion and action?
So this is the agenda request. So this is the discussion, and it's going to depend on what comes out of that discussion. what, if anything, we're doing or next steps, or if we want to hear from people or anything. But this is the discussion from the agenda request. Does that make sense?
After this, at the board's discretion, it's decided whether it's moved to or I'm sorry, at the chair's discretion, it's decided whether there's another discussion, there's not, or it becomes an action item. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's all about what it is the board wants to do next. So if the board wanted to hear from the health people, like the nurses, then we would make sure that happens. If the board had wanted an action item, then we would make sure that would happen.
But am I right? We wouldn't actually make any motions tonight necessarily, or?
That's typically what we would like to do. We would like to, if we, through discussion, if we got the sense of like, yeah, we want to hear from, is it Allison's the point person?
Board approved the job description, so we have interview.
So if we got the sense from discussion that, sorry, I don't mean to like go this on Zoom, guys, sorry, talk with my hands. If we got a sense from the board that they wanted something further, then wanted to hear from the COVID people, then that's what we would do. Does that make sense or answer?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll go ahead and vote. No other ones. Okay. So we will go ahead and vote. If you want to bring that tally sheet up, Kelly. Just 1 second. We'll bring up the tally sheet again. Okay. So the motion is to amend the agenda to add a discussion item to add regarding mitigation of respiratory and airborne illnesses, including COVID, as voted on at the last meeting for 20 minutes at the end of the discussion section. Ashley.
Yes.
Bobby.
Yes.
Christine is not here at this particular second. Cindy.
Yes.
Jonathan Young.
Yes.
Jake.
Yes.
Sorry. Lisa.
Yes.
I don't think I didn't see Marlena on. Marlena? No. Life.
Yes.
Tori. Kim.
No.
Mike Bishop.
Yes.
And Kelly. Okay, so that will pass. And now we're going to approve the consent agenda. Not consent agenda, approve the agenda with the addition of the discussion as stated in the previous motion. Is that, do we hear a motion for that?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? Discussion. Any objection to approving the agenda with the addition? Okay, none. Not seeing any or hearing any, that will pass. So our next item is going to be board reports, student reports. And we're just 1 second, we're going to have doing a screen share. Okay, go ahead, Maisie.
Awesome. Yeah, we have everyone here for tonight, so it's awesome. Yeah, well, first off, we want to recognize that we have our 2 new reps ready and super excited to join the board, which I'm absolutely thrilled about. We have one of them here with us tonight and the other is confirmed but couldn't make it tonight. So we're going to start off by giving Naomi a second to introduce herself, and she actually has a slide. So we'll start off with that, and then we'll get into, what's going on at Harwood and what have we been talking about as students.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I use she, her pronouns. I like to travel and I play sports. The board interests me because it's important to me to bring my student voice and advocate for others in my school community and also bring change. And this year, I'm looking forward to traveling to Rwanda in February and hopefully studying abroad this summer. Thank you.
So we'll be connecting with them more and showing them what it's like being a student rep and kind of how the process goes. So yeah. Next slide. I think one back. Very good. Awesome. So just a few, we kind of like to start us off with some, what are some fun things going on right now at Harwood? What's been changing? First of all, this one's near and dear to me. Fall sports just came to an end. Dr. Mike and Jake were at the cross country banquet last night, which was a lot of fun. And all of our sports teams had incredible seasons. Not all of them went exactly how we wanted, as many of you know, but it was a really impressive turnout and so many really strong athletes this year, which was super fun to watch. And I know as a senior, I tried to make almost every game I could, which I'm always so impressed with the turnout from the community as well of, Harwood alumni, parents who don't even have students at Harwood anymore out there cheering on our current athletes, which is always so awesome to see. Why don't you talk about Battle of the Bands?
Yeah, so Battle of the Bands was October 28th with almost more than 11 bands from not only Harwood, but Twinfield, Montpelier. We had like big bands with like 5 people, bass, drums, guitar. We had solo performers. And our very own Graphite Zeppelin. It's a joke on the name Led Zeppelin, but pencils don't use lead, so they're graphite now. But they performed Dazed and Confused, and they won first place in a competition. Second place was a team from Montpelier, duo, piano, and drums. And I'm pretty sure they played an Elton John song that's not coming to mind. And then the third place winner was a solo performer, guitar, and she sang. But all in all, like, it was really great. A lot of people from the community came and saw performers play. And it was a really fun little competition we held.
And one other thing we want to highlight is that the Harwood Common Ground is currently up and running. For those of you who don't know, this is the Harwood newspaper run by the journalism class, which is it's so much fun. I always enjoy reading it, and I was featured last year for having 2 flat tires in a month in the parking lot. So, you get a wide variety of things, but there's definitely some updates on sports and, current things going on. So I encourage all of you to check it out. So yeah, next one. We wanted to highlight an opportunity that has been taking place at Harvard this year that Jeswin and I have actually helped kind of get running. And Dr. Mike was able to join us the other day, but it's a program that we're calling Stepping Stones to Leadership, but it's really centered around, creating the capacity for student voice. And I think this connects a lot to, the 2 of us, as much as there's like a little bit of, ooh, we could start to include these people on discussions with the board and have more students come to public comment. And how can we, include students in the actions and the discussion of what's going on at the board table. And so this is a group of students, about 20 of us, who have gotten together. We've had 2 retreats and have really been talking about what kind of action, like what change do we want to see going on a Harwood. And this was actually that whiteboard right over there in the corner, but absolutely covered in ideas. And so I wanted to highlight that it's one area where I see a lot of possibility and a lot of, students who want to create change and want to grow as leaders. And so that's a really positive highlight that I've just been so excited about how it went. And so something I wanted to bring to all of you, something that's going on that it's a lot of opportunities.
Our aim with the program is that for people like me and Maisie, we were kind of outspoken. And so like those leadership opportunities were like we were able to get them. But for a lot of students, they're not really exposed to those same kind of opportunities. And we wanted to make this a space where those students who are really comfortable enough are comfortable yet to speak out in front of like a large crowd for what they want and to like develop those skills and to, you know, be articulate and like what they want to see change at Harwood and to let those students shine in a space such as this. So.
So we also, we had a lot of conversations at the board retreat. And so we've both still been thinking about that. And so one of our big goals for this year is to strengthen the connection between the board and the student body. And that program is one way that we're hoping to do it, of integrating, reporting back and collaboration on how do we convey what's going on here with students who often don't even know what the school board does or how it functions and all that. And so part of this is, information thoughts from all of you, but what we want to hear from us, but we're not quite sure. We haven't figured out the perfect process for that because, we don't want to be giving 50% to a ton of different things when we could really get a lot of information with one focus. One thing that I've also been, talking to people about and thinking is a partnership with the Common Ground, like I said, where I could connect with the journalism class or Jasmine and I and have them, put out some articles on, what are our roles? What have we been talking about? What's going on? And that could be one way to reach students. So that's something we're pursuing along with, thinking with all of you. So yeah. Anything to add? Good. Okay. And I think this is actually on there for later. So we can kind of like put this out there and then press pause. We talked about this last at the board retreat, but a symbolic vote for student reps. I know a lot from what I heard was a lot of, yeah, no, that would be good. And I think one of the things we highlighted that this would be a positive addition to the board process because it would allow us to enter the discussion and enter these conversations in more ways and make it a little bit more comfortable, since sometimes it's like, oh, I don't have a vote, or like I'm in the end not going to have a say. And so figuring out where to jump in, and so that would make this easier. What would that kind of look like in practice is something that we can all discuss, but like we said, it would be unweighted. It would very much just be, we'd be included as Kristen's reading out names, but it wouldn't be weighted. The next steps, I think, is exactly what we have of it's on the agenda. We're going to talk about it. And so just be thinking about, what possibilities do you see for that, and how does it look in practice, and what are your hopes for that aspect of our role and responsibility?
You covered it pretty well, but I feel like if you like having a vote, kind of just like it kind of doesn't like raises the stakes, but not really. But like when you like you're more like, I need to engage myself in these conversations, I need to participate more so that when I vote, I know all the knowledge, I've asked the questions, and I can make an informed decision. And so for upcoming student reps as well, it will lead them, encourage them to also participate more when they know they can at least have some kind of say in the process.
Yeah, and so that's all we have, but questions, comments?
So Kim first and Mike.
Could we possibly get a copy of, do we already have a copy of that linked anywhere, the presentation that you just made?
Sure, our goal is to have it in so that it can be in the board report. We're throwing some ideas around of what was going to be included for this week.
Yeah.
And we had a little bit of back and forth that caused it to not be in the board report, but usually will be.
It's totally fine. I would love it if we could get a paper copy of the slide, like a typed copy of the photograph of the various leadership. Like I'd like the picture, but it would be great if it was actually a document that we could reference with it, just because I would be really interested to see what students said about that. Thank you.
And I could send that out. I have a copy that Ellen, the teacher, had sent to me.
The student newspaper, and I don't know, maybe I'm older now, but is it a print edition or is it an online thing? Because I would like to see it or be on the list or something to get it.
So it's actually a website. They don't print it hard copy, but if you do a lap around the school after, there's a ton of QR codes like randomly put up around the halls. There's some actually on the ceiling in a few classrooms, but if you walk around, there's QR codes which will bring you directly to the website that has all the articles. I think there's actually one like on the lockers right out there that I just walked past coming here. I'll look at what it's directly linked to. I believe there's a direct URL that I should have on the top of my head, but I don't. But it is a website, so no, it's not printed.
I'll continue in my role as Maisie's assistant, and I'll include that in my follow-up tomorrow.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Jonathan.
I would just like to comment that I think among the many things that we could do to integrate students into our board meetings so that we have a better idea of what's going on from their perspective, I think that might be an opportunity for the student representatives to potentially take up an active role in kind of being the canary in the coal mine in a way, and bringing us things that we might not be aware of, problems that they aren't feeling are being addressed to the fullest, where we might not even know they're an issue at all. I think that a lot of times it's top down to them. And I would love to see in some way for those student representatives to either have a bigger group of people that could work together to try to bring us more of a sense of what things they would like to see us, what we're missing, what we don't get to see because of our position. They're in the school all the time and really feeling the effects of all of our policies and all the things we miss or get right. And I would love to hear more about that, as opposed to, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love hearing about the sports and the activities and the events, but, I know that not everything is great in any school, but I would love to hear, for us to be in a position to be able to be maybe a little proactive about some of these items that maybe don't get addressed to their satisfaction, even if they've been brought up in some of the conversations they've had as a group or in various surveys and stuff. So I don't know, I just really think it's a great idea. I really hope we can integrate more student input into our activities, and I fully support any of those attempts.
Naomi, we're going to want to hear lots about your Rwanda trip when you get back, for sure. Is there any other questions, comments? Well, welcome. And we look forward to meeting the next student rep, the other one next week. Perfect. So we're going to move on to the superintendent. He doesn't have a report, but if anybody has questions for him, I've allowed a few minutes on the agenda. If anybody has any questions. Sure. Don't all raise your hands at once, guys.
I'm very popular tonight, I can see.
Okay, so go ahead, Jonathan.
This is a way for me to get around the fact that I didn't send you an email, Kristen, about the CVCC open house that they're having. And I was going to ask if Dr. Mike was going to mention it in his report. And if not, then I was going to say that it is on November 17th from 5:30 to 7:30. The CVCC down in Barrie is going to be having an open house. So anybody that would be interested in seeing what they're doing down there could go there. But I bet Dr. Mike was going to mention that in his report right now anyway.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but I can share with the board that we did share that with the principal.
If any board members are interested going, it's the 17th, right? From, what did you say, 5:30 to 7:30? Did I have that? Okay. That anybody would be welcome to go and check it out.
I will also chime in that I had an opportunity to sure that I programs one. Jody Emery, the director superintendent of the Career Center, who Jonathan works with. I had an opportunity to spend time there. The programs, I met a number of who were at the CVC, and I've been involved in career and technical education for in my previous superintendency, and it's a very impressive program, and we should be very proud of our students who attend there, but also the work they're doing. I also had the opportunity yesterday to spend 2 hours with our students at HCLC. Route 100, and that's also a very impressive program with some good work going on with our students.
Excellent. If nothing else, okay, we're going to move on to discussions. And our first one up is an IDC presentation. So we have three of our principals that are going to come and join us at the table. 1 second.
And while they're coming up, I do want to introduce Meg McDonough, who I think everyone knows our principals, but just in case we don't, Meg McDonough is one of our co-principals here at Harwood Union High School. Kaya Korb, who you met in a previous discussion, is principal at Waitsfield, and Celia Gugamo. And what I had said is one of the biggest gifts that's been given to me as a new superintendent is the fact that we have an exceptionally talented and strong administrative team who work really hard with all of our students. So one of my goals that I had shared with the board, one of my unwritten goals, is to make sure we're highlighting my voice and Lisa's voice, who you hear every meeting, our principals, so that you can hear about the work throughout the district. So while I pause, I'll ask one of them so I can pull up the presentation. If maybe Meg, you can start with a little bit of an introduction of the IDC, Meg, Kaya, or Celia. I'll be real quick.
That was entertaining. Good evening, everyone. Inter-district choice. This is a very short primer in the history of it. Many of you were living in the district and were part of the vote that was the consolidation to form HUUSD. And maybe you remember when you voted that one of the articles connected to the forming of HUUSD was to allow for intra-district choice. So that is when inter-district choice started, which would be March of 2017. And so it is encoded in the articles of HUUSD. Therefore, to change it would be part of changing the whole articles of our incorporation as a district. You may recall that when we became a district, it had time to get our act together before we had to be operational. So there's a lot of time figuring things out, and then we became a functioning district. So we didn't actually need to start applying these things until the following year. So the board adopted the policy about inter-district choice in March of 2017, but then we didn't come up with operational procedures until the next year when it needed to go into effect. So HUUSD's intra-district choice is something that's integral to our district, but was something new for us to figure out how to make work. And I think that since it first came into place, we've just realized some things about how operationally it plays out. And that's what we're here to share tonight, is some of our learning and some changes for how to make things work as smoothly as possible, so the greatest clarity happens for families and students, that they get the information that they need, and we can make everything work smoothly for everyone.
And at a previous meeting, and I don't remember who it was, a board member had made a comment about inter-district choice, and it was around the time when we open up the process for the next school year. And as a new superintendent, not only in this district, but in Vermont, I decided that it was probably good for me to come up to speed with that. So I pulled together, we talked about it at an administrative meeting. We pulled together a small work group where we really went through the processes and decided, what works. Are there any improvements? And we decided that we really feel, especially after 2 years where it has not really been a focus, it's been information, that we as an administrative team felt we needed to do a better job of sharing information and being communicative with families. So we looked at the processes, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about that process and the background and some areas in the administrative procedures that we're going to clarify. We're not really going to change pieces, but we think there were some windows that we'll discuss that were rather broad, and we want to make sure that we're providing not only general information to family, but also decision-making pieces in an earlier process to help the overall piece and in the overall process. And Kaya jumped, she hit a little bit of this, so we'll move on with, in my not quick ability to be able to pull up the slides. So we'll move on to some areas that are not addressed that Celia will talk about.
So as an overview, there are a couple of parts of options or choices that families might have that are not covered through our interdistrict choice policy. One of those is Act 166, which is preschool. I'd say it's probably one of the areas where I see families like applying for IDC when they don't need to. As a Vermonter in the state of Vermont, you can use your Act 166 dollars to go to any universal preschool program. So for example, as a resident of the town of Berlin, I could use my Act 166 dollars to send my daughter to Waitsfield's preschool program if they had open space. That's not governed by our IDC policy. And the other piece that is not governed is high school choice. So those are two big areas that are not covered by IDC.
And that's a statewide process,
Yes,
but the high school administration shares out that information, I believe, Meg, if I remember, around the January, February timeframe. So we thought we would just take the actual procedures, and I'm going to pass around copies for board members. These have some areas, we are still in the process. There's some areas that we still want to clarify and add a little more detail to, but I'll give you printed out copies. But just we took the procedures and put it on a timeline so you could see the phase where we are right now. And this is the way the procedures were written prior to our current discussion. So we're in the process right now of accepting applications. We have a form online, parents fill out, they submit, I get notifications. So I keep track, as does Shannon Wisdom, who's our project manager of this on a regular basis. During this period of time, we are at the process, as you will hear from Lisa in a little while, on not only budget, but talking about staffing configurations and some of the behind the scenes work that occurs to help start preparing for the next school year. It seems kind of early, but in our world, that next school year planning starts almost as soon as the students enter the building on that first day of school. And then in March, there is a last day for any RIF notifications that goes into the process. March, April, the IDC requests are acted upon, final decisions are made. And remember this piece, because we'll come back to this later. This is an area where we felt that we needed as an administration to provide better information, more expedient information to families. April is the time of the process for schools to look at all students, class placements, information to families. There's a lot of planning at the teacher level that starts to occur for the next school year. May, early June are the transition activities, and a lot of work on the academic front, as we know, with better clarity what our classes will look like in the following year. So a lot of that educational planning to make sure we have the resources, not only educational resources, but in some cases we deal with students who have disabilities. So we may need some additional equipment, additional pieces of information in the classroom. Perhaps we need students who we have to know that at one particular building, a student may need occupational therapy or speech therapy, and all those related services go into that process. And then there is an ability during the year for last minute decisions or changes to be acted upon. There's one area where it was kind of extenuating circumstances, but then the main two areas are families who either move into the district that they need to request school choice, or families who may already be in the district but move to another attendance area. So after all of that occurs, the principal magic happens behind the scenes. And Kaya's going to talk a little bit about that principal magic.
I actually think this was a bit of a setup because I was thinking the components that are magic, planning budgets and working on staffing, it doesn't necessarily feel magical. Yeah, it makes it magic. So staffing assignments and budget aren't magical, but there is a lot of planning that goes into preparation for the next year. And so whether that is looking at the elementary school on what your teaming configurations will look like, arrangements, as many of you know, we're really flexible in how we structure things. Being relatively small, we might look at, do we need to have where we're allocating some of our staff to best support needs? Are we going to put them in 3-4 clusters? Will we do straight grades? How will we organize? And then at the middle school level, thinking about, again, teaming configurations. And so knowing not only the number of students, but the makeup of the class is really important. And so those kinds of considerations are the behind the scenes sort of things that occur. As families, you've received perhaps a notice that tells you to give us, we ask for your input. And that is really a valuable part. And when we're thinking about planning for the next year, there's a lot of other pieces that are going on as well. And I think the next slide begins to illustrate or talk a little bit more about some of those. So in terms of both interdistrict choice, but our planning, we are looking at, as I was saying, about things like our class composition. And we look not only at the size, but we look at things like gender identity. We look at needs of students. We look at how different groups of students get along and work together. So all of those factors are really important for our planning. And we look not just for the maximum class size, that is an important figure, but also what's going to be a really workable number for an effective group. And where do we put staffing and supports? So all of those things are part of that magic that is going on. And we're also looking to build things as equitably as possible. So we're meeting everyone's needs in the best way we can. Where that becomes a programmatic concern for interdistrict choice is the bulk of that work happens well before May. And if you recall what was on that prior timeline, or you look at the procedures that we have now, final decisions aren't being made until May. And when you have up to 70 people potentially applying for interdistrict choice, that's a lot of moving pieces that could impact making our magic a lot less powerful.
And I would say also part of that magic is making sure that we are being mindful stewards of the taxpayers' resources. And sometimes the maximum number, having more classes may be a necessity, but sometimes we may be under-enrolled, particularly at maybe a middle school, where we may need to look at utilization and maybe utilizing staff in a different way, rather than having very small classes. So we want to make sure that we're good stewards of the resources that the board entrusts to us.
One other programmatic consideration that's really important in our IDC, and Mike just touched on this, but it's the way that we provide our student support services. So the way in which we provide IEP services to students who have identified disabilities. So if we don't know about that early, it's hard to plan for staffing or building needs or all of the things are become more challenging. To find that out later, if you find out, a short time before the end of the year that you actually need 3 additional staff members and an extra special educator because you happen to have a large number, say I had 10 students who all of a sudden appeared on my caseload, that would mean that I would need to hire. And that becomes exponentially more challenging the longer you get. If I find that out in July, I'm that's really hard. And doesn't best serve our students. It allows us the magic becomes sort of a scramble, and it allows us not always to make the best programmatic decisions for our students.
And I was going to say, it's not to be convenient for superintendents or finance directors or principals. It really is to make sure that we're properly serving the students who are entrusted to our care. So, and just another, other examples that occur a lot of times, we will have requests in multiple buildings for inter-district choice. And I've had conversations with principals who've shared with me some circumstances from past years. And there may be a place where we have a class and that class is on the cusp of needing a second classroom so that we don't have large class sizes. But when you look at some of the students who may be granted to leave the building, come in the building, if that doesn't happen in a timely fashion, it makes that decision process, which also has budgetary implications, more difficult. So that's also something that we think is important for parents and board members to understand, that there are some of the considerations that we have as part of that. So there's a lot of kind of moving pieces that it's good for us to be able to figure out as soon as possible, and also give that information to parents, families, so they can make the decisions that are best interest for their families. So with that, we're looking at some additional pieces, and these are the areas where we're looking to define them a little better, these two areas. And if we look at that, this is again the slide you saw at the beginning, and this is some area where we continue to want to define this, what we would like, what we're planning to do, and what we think we would really like to do for families is have a open informational session. We would host it here at Harwood. All principals would be here. We would go over a lot of the same information, the same consideration for families, because what happens at this time, we're starting to field a lot of questions individually from families. So while we feel it's important for us to be here to serve our families, we also want to be efficient with our time, especially when a principal may be getting similar questions throughout each week, and the questions have already started. So we thought having one meeting where we're all present would be an efficient use for parents' information. We plan to record it, but it also would be a good use of our principals' time so they can focus on their instructional duties but also provide the information that parents feel they need. The other piece is we decided that March to April time frame to notify families is a very long period, 8 to 9 weeks. It can coincide with the very end of winter break and sometimes maybe the beginning or portions of the spring break. And we feel that we want to give information to parents earlier. So as an administrative team, we've talked about it, and we are going to start working on, I think it's the second Friday in February. And that's a piece that will clarify in the procedures, but that's our decision point. We want to get that information to families before the winter break so they can start talking that over and have some time so that they can make a decision, give us the information we need so that when we get around to that May timeframe, we can have not only good planning, but we can have good transition activities for the students who are being impacted by that. Did I miss anything? Again, this is the new man who has not gone through the process yet. So they're being very cordial and helping tutor me along in the processes that I've not seen yet.
Just to provide a little insight into the timeline specifically at Harwood as the only high school in the district. We actually, to Mike's point, we do truly start planning for next year almost as soon as the year begins. We are already really in our scheduling process for next year. And so a lot of this impacts our timeline very, very specifically. When we return from December break in January, we actually start meeting with special educators specifically in order to make sure we are corralling the services needed by students who will be coming to us, and so that we can plan accordingly. If we find out about students coming to the district too late, it becomes really challenging, to Celia's point, not only to hire, but to make sure that we've had enough team meetings. If it's a student who requires a lot of, or many different services. So we have to back it out quite a bit, even though it sounds kind of unbelievable that at this point we're already thinking that far ahead.
Mike, were you speaking specifically to this February's timeline?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the proposed changes in timelines for this year is to, as Mike said, that I believe it's the second Friday in February is when families would be notified of that they have space in their requested school or not. And then families would have a week to finalize that decision. So it really shortens what is now a very long, like I would refer to as a gray area, a very murky area that's like, I'm in, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I might be like chatting with a whole bunch of people, or we're not sure what's going on in the gray zone. It just goes into an abyss. And it leaves us without an opportunity to do the magic. So this looks like a notification of you have a spot, and then you have a week. I believe we decided on a week timeline to notify the school district of a yes or a no, thank you. I'd like to stay in my homeschool or my current school, and then that allows us to start. So that notification would actually happen to the district prior to February break. So we go into February break knowing.
And by we, I think it means everyone,
Everybody.
right?
Right.
So that,
Right.
because I think one of the pieces we've heard from families is if you've applied for interdistrict choice and you're waiting to hear, currently you are waiting until the end of April. And that can be pretty anxiety producing when the high school or the middle schools are asking what language you're going to take. And your response is, I don't know what school I'm going to get. So this hopefully will provide families with information when they're looking for it and being able to see it in one. I think it puts a lot of burden if someone is considering changing schools to go to each school or try to find it out, put all the information forward, and then give you time to consider, and then know before all of those transition components begin.
So with that, are there any comments?
I had a question. So I am a parent of a student who's a sixth grader who we did apply for interdistrict IDC for him. And my question is, one of the things that I was hoping to do is arrange for some sort of like meeting, perhaps with the special ed team at each school, or give him a chance to walk around the school, try to arrange that. I don't know. I haven't asked yet. I thought I had more time. So I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity for the admin team to consider an extension of the response under certain circumstances. Like, I don't know that I could arrange that in a week. I don't know that you guys could. Do you know, like, so I would like to help him make an informed choice. And I don't, that the timeline just got a lot shorter. So anyway, I would just be, that's the one thing I would worry about. Everything else, I totally get it. It absolutely makes sense. And for my other kids, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but for this one, it is.
Without speaking about your child, Kim, I'd say that specifically, when we put information forward, what we'll put forward is in that presentation, what are the structural kinds of things that you can expect, that the kinds of things that I think are what can really inform your choices about intra-district choice and where you would go to. When a decision is based upon staffing can change. I'm thinking about last year at Harwood, there were still staffing changes and positions that hadn't been filled. And so you wouldn't have been able to make a decision based upon staff, we can tell you in one fell swoop, so you don't need to organize them, what is the teaming structure and how a special educator works at the 7th and 8th grade in one spot and in the 7th and 8th grade in another, or how those are organized. Those are the kinds of questions that we hope to organize and put forward for everyone. And I don't think we highlighted that we're thinking this will be an in-person presentation, but also be recorded, appreciating the date we've picked may not work in everyone's schedules. So prior to, we're standing throughout this, we have answered questions for people when they've contacted us, but none of our schools have offered to families that you can sit down and meet with teachers to make a decision. We simply don't have capacity to do that. And I think a challenge is often when we think about picking a school, if we think about other models, you do a lot of research, you find the things. We're offering an opportunity. There are different options. If the school that's your residential school doesn't work for you, then there are other options, and we want to support giving the information, but we're not prepared to be able to support everyone, say, with the teachers in every school, or putting on open houses to court people to come to each of the schools. And that's a challenge. I really understand from families' perspectives, you're wanting to make the best decisions for your children, and we want to make sure we really put that forth in a way that that works for families.
And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring that up to the board, to get some input like that exact question, because that's one of the things that we want to address as robustly as possible in our presentation in December, just knowing that we don't have the capacity to have, a lot of parent meetings when we're already having that for parents right now. So that's one of the things that we recognize, but we also want to make sure that we're addressing it in the best way possible, knowing there may also be points for your current school team. You may have questions for your current school team that can be answered, because we also, while each of our schools are different, we try to be all uniform in the opportunities we're presenting. Every school has their own unique character and personality, which is what makes this district so great. But at the same time, we're also one. We're unique, but we're also unified in that sense.
Can I just clarify? I was not assuming that I was going to get like a personal tour from every, like that isn't what I was implying. I was more thinking about the 1 week turnaround time between the decision when we find out and the 1 week until we have to let you know. That's pretty fast for my particular kid I'm thinking of, to weigh the pros and cons, really think about what that means. Like I would probably take him to walk through the schools, just if I was allowed to. I mean, just sort of so he could feel like what it felt like. I'm thinking of students for my kid, and I imagine for others, it might take more than a week to make an informed decision. That's all.
And there are the questions that you can go ahead, but there are questions we were looking to have as well, some feedback. We had planned to meet. We have a meeting on our agenda for tomorrow. We wanted to take this feedback and kind of filter that into our final processes.
And your comments are making me think about, we've been talking about our communication to families now about both the evening of December 15th, but about these dates. It will be really important that we in multiple ways let people know what they are, so they have time now to make their pros and cons. We can provide information, and that's part of the reason for that timing. December 15th, we put information out, and then there's time in January to return and ask questions. We're not looking to, your information is helpful because our goal is not to make people feel stressed or harried. It is to make it feel clearer and give a band of time so that you're not left in this, it's getting time to transition. We do begin transition meetings for students with significant needs in February. So if we gave an extension of that time, I would worry that some of the students that we need the most time to really support the transition for aren't having that opportunity.
And to that end, having those decisions made earlier also provides, exactly to Kaya's point, that there are, if the decision's made and then your son is going to one school, he then gets to do the whole transition process, or that child gets to really experience the transition process from the start of like, if there are opportunities for extra tours, or because there are some students for whom there are additional opportunities to spend time in the school and get to meet teachers or to have new touch points in the building. And so that's an opportunity when that decision's made to really be able to get all of the support that all students need. And some students just need a couple extras. So that's just another great opportunity.
Cindy, go ahead.
Mine's a simple little thing. In two places, we refer to the students that are eligible for this in two different ways, either K through 8 or PK 4-7. I don't know what happened to our 1, 2, 3s and our 8th graders. So just as you look at the procedures and stuff, I don't know what PK 4-7 means. And it's in several places and it's a little confusing. And if I were a parent trying to figure this out, I couldn't figure it out exactly. That's all.
Thank you, Cindy. That's very helpful. And that's why we want to come to all of you and get the very practical pieces as well. So thank you.
Mike, go ahead.
I realize that this is part of the articles, but I guess my question is more blunt. At the end of the day, is this kind of just a real pain? It's kind of my question, because it seems to me that and I agree with you, Kaya, I'm afraid this is going to turn into, these college kids you see on TV choosing a college to go to, or high school kid of what college they're going to go to with the hat. And I think back to my kids who are older, and we came from a district that had high school choice. And on the high school night, all these high schools would come and they'd put out, bling, and the kids would clean up and they'd get wooed to go to that high school and this and that. And I'm just feeling like, I realize this might have been, and maybe Christine can jump in, but this may have been a negotiation to try to get this thing to pass. But it seems kind of like this is a lot of work, and I'm almost wondering if having a parent meeting is going to encourage more work, and to let parents know like this is a great thing. And then I worry about buses. And are we required, is there a limit on kids? We have to bring all these buses and get them all over the district. And so I'm just giving you, maybe these aren't even questions, they're just thoughts, but it seems like we need to be really careful, because I think we might be creating work for ourselves. I don't know. That's just my thought.
Well, we're going to try it, and if there's something we need to do better or to change, we'll change. What I can tell you, just being blunt as well, behind the scenes conversations are, as administrators, there's a lot of positive benefits with it. So I don't think we see it as a bad thing. We see it as a good thing. The team sees it as a good thing. But what I will say is what we don't want to have happen, because we are one district, is we don't want to encourage saying that one school is better than the other. This is personal need for family. So that's why we really want to do that one presentation, because we are all one district. We have really good schools. Some have different needs, and there's different reasons why parents choose the choice, but and we support that. But we don't want to be seen as I can tell you, Kaya and Celia don't want to be seen as competing against each other, because we have really good teachers in all of our buildings.
It would be, I imagine, or people on Zoom can't hear you. I would imagine that the majority, a lot of our presentation will be about the similarities. And some of it, I think, is calling out, being like, there aren't as many differences as one might think. And truly, the benefit of this policy that the board adopted is that if I'm a parent who lives in Waterbury and I happen to work in the town of Facein, and I drive past Facein every day, and it makes more sense for me to drop my kiddo off and then head up to Sugarbush, then that, why not offer that opportunity? Or vice versa, if somebody lives in Facein and drives and works in Montpelier and drives past Moortown every day, and it works for them, and the school happens to have space, I would imagine that people would be using it more for that than programmatic differences. So that's how I envision, I see it as like an offering to help and encourage people to stay within our district, rather than like school shopping, for lack of a better term.
Lisa, go ahead.
I'm curious if you can enlighten us a little bit on the process when determining whether a request or a group of requests meets the operational needs of the district. I only saw in one place a mention of how it affects the sending school. There's quite a few places that talks about how it affects the receiving school, the class sizes, limits, things like that. But I worry, and I think we've seen it in the past, about how we can get a little bit of a landslide effect of there becomes trends of people leaving one school to go to another, because when everyone's doing it, everyone thinks they should be doing it. And it can really affect the schools that are getting left behind. And so I think I want to be really intentional about how we set our procedures to really take into account how it's affecting both the sending school and the receiving school when we consider applications.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a really good point. And it's something that we've had some discussion with as well.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I was just wondering from the student's perspective, if they were moved to a new school, is there any like procedures in place to help them like assimilate or like entwine into the new community? Because like I know like for like a new student that joined this year, they came from Massachusetts and they were just kind of like thrown in there and didn't really know much about like where their classes were or like where they should go. So
I think that that's a great question. And there are different experiences that happen because our grades in our schools don't all line up. So in the Valley schools, 6th grade students, rising 7th graders are all about a transition, and schools are really set up to support a transition. That might be one of the things that we talk about when we look about what structurally is the same or different. So 7th graders coming to Harwood, it is the time when everyone is new. Whereas if you are a 7th grader going to Grosset, a transition already happened at 5th grade for a good portion of the students that are there, although there is a 7-8 transition as well. So sometimes the whole building is set up to support a transition. And that's one of the things people should think about. We do at the elementary schools, we have a common transition process for any student who comes through IDC. You can dig around on the website and find it, but it supports a way that students can come and visit and feel connected into the new community. We often support if there's a transition activity, like a kind of a step-up day, students would come and do that. And then each of our schools try very hard whenever a student moves in through interdistrict choice or just moves to find ways to help assimilate students into the climate and the culture of the school.
Go ahead, Kim.
I have one more question about the timing. I'm thinking about, is there a way to let families know likelihood that their request might be approved or not approved? I don't know if there is, but I'm thinking like, I don't want to tell my kid that there might be an option that there isn't going to be. If there's only one choice, we're not even going to have the conversation. There's one choice. This is your choice. So I just, based on numbers and timing and the other applications that have come in, it would be helpful as a parent to know the likelihood that choice would be granted based on just numbers, so that I would know whether or not to tell my kid there is a choice or not. So if you guys could think about that, that would be helpful too.
Definitely. Thank you.
Anything else? Well, this was very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this.
Thanks to Celia, Kaya, and Meg.
We're going to move on to our next discussion item, which is educational spending presentation by Lisa. We're going to bring that up on the screen just a second.
So what I wanted to go over to explain a very complicated educational procedure in terms of pupils and how we get to the educational spend. What I included in the slide deck, and I'll of course share my slide deck with everybody, is how Act 60 and 68, which was established many years ago, and this was to address the funding inequities among the school districts. This was really established as a system to pool states' educational budgetary requirements from across jurisdictions and pay for them with pooled property taxes. I just kept this slide in. I know Michelle has shared this year over year with everybody, but I just thought it was important that we keep that up there and understand why this came into play. Next slide. So I wanted to share with you the last 6 years since we've been established as a unified union school district, the budgets, the voter approved budgets, year over year and where we were. So in this current fiscal year 23, our voter approved budget was $42.6 million. It was an increase of 5% over last year, 5.6% over last year. And that was primarily due to salaries and benefits and some other increased costs in supplies, transportation, and utility costs. So I just wanted to share that the last 5 years. So there are many components that come in to establish the equalized property tax rate. We need to first look at, and if you look and go around this clockwise, basically a clockwise configuration here, you have to look at proposed expenditures, estimated revenues, equalized pupils, which come up with a property yield, and they call it the yield, which then gives us an equalized property tax. And then we also come into play and we take that property tax and we also look at the town's CLAs. And that actually gives us the tax rate, homestead tax rate, for us to then based on our taxes. So go to the next slide. So what amount of the budget is funded by the statewide property tax? So our voter approved budget is $42.6 million. Our local, state, and federal revenues that can be deducted from our voter expenditure budget, which then would give us our educational spending amount, which is $35.1 million. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of what the general revenues come into for the general fund, that's local revenues, public and private tuition, E-rates, interest income, leasing revenue that we get from our bus facility located at Harwood, some building use fees. We also receive state revenues, small grant. We have 2 small school grants, about approximately $105,000. We have the new educational block grant that came into play this year. We also receive special extraordinary revenue coming in to reimburse us for expenses over $60,000. We get reimbursed at 95% once they reach that threshold over $60,000. We get early essential education, driver's ed. So there's a bunch of other small revenues that we get in from the state. And we do get one small piece of federal revenue, which is the forest revenue that's considered a small grant, but that actually comes in under the general reserve. Next slide. I also wanted to share with you, but that is not included in our general budget or our expenses, are other pots of funding that we do have. And at another meeting, I'll go over all those different pots of money. And these are actually grant revenues that pay for a whole host of things that don't come out of our $42.6 million budget. So that's a small tobacco grant of $35,000. We have a new grant that started this year, a school nurse leadership grant. That's a new leadership position that we just voted on, which is approximately $79,000. food service, Best Act grant. These are many Title I, Title II, Title IV, and then also ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER, just to name a few. We already had ESSER 1. That project came to an end already, that period. So ESSER 2 funding, and we have leftover residual ESSER 2 funding that we're still using this current year, and ARP ESSER, which we also consider ARP or ESSER 3, that funding is due to end in fiscal year 24. Next slide. So the equalized pupil rate is important. It's very complicated. And what they look at is they look at a 2-year weighted average or an average of the daily membership. And that daily ADM, which they call it, is from the 11th to the 30th day. And they average that over and they give us then what the pre-kindergarten rate is, the elementary, and then also the secondary rate. Just to let you know, that actually is going to be changing in 2025. They're going to be moving to what's called Act 127, and that is going to be using a long-term weighted average. There's a lot more information coming out about that. But for fiscal year, current year and fiscal year 24, we will still be using the 2-year average, the equalized pupils, for equalized pupils. So what is the homestead property yield? They actually call it the yield. It's set by the legislature annually and is used to determine the equalized tax rate. The yield is the amount equivalent to $1 homestead tax rate. Despite its name, it has no connection between how much revenue is raised from $1 tax rate and per pupil spending amount. As stated before, the yield is very difficult to estimate, and it's driven by a lot of factors that go into play. And when I shared that with you before. Last year, the property yield was $11,317. This year, it's gone up significantly. Next slide. So in looking at the calculation, you're going to look at our educational spend, which is the result of that is $35.1 million. So we took our voter approved budget of 42, and then we deducted our $7 million in revenues, which gives us then our educational spend. So that's our educational spend. We then divide that by the equalized pupils, which we receive that from the state, which then gives us our educational spending per equalized pupil, which is $20,285. Now, I just want to let everybody know the excess amount for equalized pupil is currently the state at $19,977. That is actually on hold for another couple of years until 2025. So we're slightly over that, but things are going to be changing. That's on hold right now. We look at the property yield per 100 for the rate, and what the state gives us is $13,314. Last year, as I mentioned before, it was $11,317. So that property yield actually went up by 17.6% this year. And again, I'll show you later on, but there's a lot of driving factors with that yield. So the state actually raised that amount. And again, whether it's more cash flow or whatever, that was a big increase from previous years. When you take that and you divide that, you get the equalized homestead property rate of $1.52. Next slide. Here, I just wanted to show you over the years, our voter approved budgets, less our revenues, and looking at the equalized pupil rates. This is just, a display of where we've come from the equalized tax rate. So for instance, in fiscal year 22, we were at 1.65. We actually dropped in fiscal year 23 down to 1.52. That was because, again, the higher rate that came in at 13,000. Next slide. So the common level of appraisal. The common level of appraisal is a mechanism that helps ensure uniformed property values across the state. The CLA is a ratio of the town's listed values versus the state's listed values. The state's listed values is comprised of actual sales, generally averaged over 3 years. The state's fair market value is the equalized educational grand list that you've heard people speak of. When the fair market value increases in a town, it decreases the CLA, which causes the town's tax rate on the bills to slightly increase. And given the values in the real estate in Vermont in the past year, the CLA is expected to go down in many communities, which means actual tax rates in those towns might be much higher than forecasted statewide, given the real estate market over the last 2 years. Here I just gave you a slide of how it's calculated. It really is the equalization study. There's a common level appraisal for every Vermont town is a result of the equalization study performed by Vermont State's Tax Department. The equalizational study compares the ratio of the grand listed value to the sale price for all the arm length sales in the town over the prior 3 years. So it's a 3-year study that they look at and a measure. So if the grand list price are generally more than the sales price for the recent sales, the town will end up with a CLA less than 100%. And if the lists are generally less than, if the grand list values are generally less than the sales price for recent sales, then the town ends up with a CLA more than 100%. Once again, I just want to make sure that it is used to adjust the homestead and not the non-homestead tax rates. And when a CLA goes down, the homestead rate increases. But in the case what we're going to look at, it actually dropped taxes this year because that rate went up to $13,000. So here's a perfect example where in 22, the CLAs by town, I've listed them. And in fiscal year 23, you'll see they actually went down. But again, because of that number went up from 11,317 in fiscal year 22 to over 13,000 in fiscal year 23. So that actually dropped property taxes slightly. You'll see I gave examples of 250,000, 350,000, and 450,000. So prior year fund balances, that's something that is looked at and reviewed and discussed at the annual planning meeting. For instance, when I believe it was our September meeting, I said we had a preliminary prior year balance of 696,931. We don't have the audit report back yet. That's a preliminary number, but that's something that will have to be voted on whether we add it to our fund balance in fiscal year 24, because it's always a 2-year carry forward. This was an ending balance of fiscal year 22, which would either add to our fund balance in fiscal year 24, or we then vote on it to go into our maintenance reserve. I actually kept this in, Michelle had this in her, sure.
Will you use the mic? Sorry. Oh, we don't want
Hello. How would that affect the tax rate? Whether you carry it over into a maintenance fund or use it included in the budget.
Right. It could affect it, and it could slightly decrease slightly. But again, there's a lot of factors that come into play, and we won't have preliminary numbers of where that amount is going to be. For instance, prior year it was 11,317, and then it jumped up to 13,000. I can't give you a guaranteed answer because until we have all of those pieces of the puzzles put together, there's a lot of factors that add to that. There's a good source reference on YouTube, apparently, that was put together several years back explaining this process. It's quite clever. It's cartoonish, but it's very good. So I would suggest you guys watch that and review that. In the last board meeting, I included the overview of the budget timeline. I included it again here. There are obviously deadlines that we have to meet when we need to start talking about the budget, priorities, initiatives, and then deadlines when we have to present it, warn it, and then for our annual town meeting. Big, in constructing fiscal year 24's budget, there's many concerns going forward. What the CLA will be, and we won't have that information until probably December, the first week of December. Preliminary numbers, staffing and recruitment and retention. We have several open positions this year. We'll need to look at what we're going to be doing for fiscal year 24. Healthcare costs rising. Healthcare are right now preliminarily going up 12.6% for our healthcare. Insurances are probably going up about 8%. So we have some big ticket challenges ahead of us. And we also have our ESSER funding, which is ending in fiscal year 24. So there's several positions that were put on ESSER funding to help us, but we need to be looking at that. That's a challenge in the future of how we then address that beyond fiscal year 25, beyond fiscal year 24, but in fiscal year 25. So many of that one-time funding ends in fiscal year 24. Comments, questions?
Just fiscal year 24 is end of next school year?
Fiscal year 24 begins July 1st, 2022, and then 2023,
Yeah.
and then ends June 30th, 2024. So a fiscal year always begins on July 1st. So we're currently in fiscal year 23.
Thank you.
I feel like I should probably know this, but is there a document somewhere that shows what ESSER funds have been used for and will be used for, the various categories?
Yes.
Is it in the, where is it?
I'm not sure if she had, Michelle, I'm sure Michelle has shared that, but go ahead.
This is one of the other questions that the administrative team has been having, along with some of the other topics. We plan to have a presentation. We're working on a presentation to come back to the board in January on the things that we're doing with the money right now. But I'm sure there's a comprehensive list that Lisa and I can find as well.
January is fine. I just wanted to know kind of what we were going to be losing funding for, just so we knew.
Yep, great point.
That and comprise that we have that currently, and to be able to understand the positions for both ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER.
Any other questions? We can also get this to everybody. So then I know it's a lot, it's a lot of information. Any other questions, comments at this moment? Go ahead, Lisa.
So just to be super clear, the fact that the yield went up so much is a really good thing for us as taxpayers. Is that correct? And then,
yes.
And do we know why? Like, is that something that could happen, continue to happen? It could go back down next year. Like, what are the factors there?
A lot of it's political factors, and also sometimes it's just if they have residual funding available that's factored into that. But it comes from the state. They did not really, I believe the initial preliminary estimate was like 12,000 something. I don't know the amount, but it was not 13,000, the property yield. So it actually went up 17.6%, which was very surprising.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. We're going to move on to student reps, advisory, voting on action items. So I put in the leadership report. I felt like I got a sense, or we got a sense around the table at the retreat that people liked that idea. Anybody want to comment? Want to say anything? Go. Anybody? Go ahead.
I think it's a good idea and I like it. And I imagine that it would kind of be like when we elect a new board member and get to hear from the select board of that town, where it's just an additional insight and helpful information for us.
Go ahead, Jake.
Somebody explain this to me very quickly.
Sure. So the thought had been brought up about the student reps having kind of, I don't want to say a feel-good vote because that's not really how I would describe it, but they would be able to weigh in on our votes. It wouldn't count like our votes as a symbolic voting to let us know also what they think of it. Do I have that correct, guys?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, if it was gonna be real relevant, like we're all from like me and Mason from Waterbury, I don't think it would even like work out correctly. But it's just a symbolic vote that pulls us in more to engage, and it lets you know what our opinions are on certain topics. Just kind of drives the participation, engagement, and our voices are heard a little bit better.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I love the idea. I think that you made my point, which is that it will make you sit here and really sort of delve into some of the thicker, more intense subject matter. Naomi, just teasing. But I think it's great. I think it is meaningful. It shows that we are listening to our students, which I think is really important.
Anybody on Zoom land that wanted to say anything or feel good about it, or I just don't want to leave you guys out.
Yeah, I'd like to just say I totally agree with Ashley. I think it's a great idea. I think, and it kind of dovetails in with what I was saying earlier, is that anything we can do to bring in more input from the students, the better. I don't think that could ever be a bad thing. So I think we should obviously pursue that. And I don't know, yeah, or even not to give the vote any actual weight, but maybe if there's some strong feelings about a particular topic, that the students could have the ability to kind of say, stop the discussion and wait, we have this to say. I don't know, but yeah, anyway, yes.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I think the big positives to me in this idea that getting the students involved in the discussion so that we hear what they're thinking before we vote. Obviously, if they're kind of in alphabetical order, we're not going to really hear what their vote is before we vote, or some of us vote. But I think it's important that there's a public record so we can kind of have some data about whether the board's in step with what the students are thinking over time too.
I really like the idea. You all have been doing wonderful. I love how earlier you're talking about, involving other students who aren't necessarily naturally ready to be at the table. So I think your values are great. You're very articulate. I think what Lisa just said is an interesting thought, just even thinking about stuff like vote order, because I know sometimes that can be a little weird. Like if you're voting first, you might not know, it might be more pressure or something. I don't know. So one thing along those lines is just maybe checking with your networks and seeing if other boards do this, or if there's other student reps out there that might have some tips on how to actually operationalize it.
To Life's point, I think the state board actually has student reps that act in an advisory capacity, so that might be something to look at.
So to kind of make this official, do we feel like this should be like an action item at the next agenda? How do people feel about it? Yes. Okay, so we'll bring something back for the next agenda. Perfect. Thanks, guys. Very exciting. Okay, so the next item was protocol by which to recognize students who have achieved some level of recognition. Mike, do you want to speak a little bit to this?
Suggested to the leadership that it would be nice since we are about students, and we have students in this district who do great things, to have an ability to recognize them for recognitions, and for things that they're doing that are above and beyond. And I suggested that the board discuss what that protocol may be. If you walk into our schools any day of the week, you'll find a lot of tremendous things. But what sets that apart, because we want to be fair at the same time, if that's something the board's interested in doing, I suggested students who receive some type of state level recognition as a possibility. But we also have, along the same lines, I've asked the leadership team. We had 2 teachers who are recognized at the University of Vermont. 2 teachers from every school district are recognized yearly as outstanding educators. We have 2 teachers, and we're planning to bring them next week to be recognized by the board. And I've worked with the board leadership to develop a resolution that the board can present. But I think to highlight the positive things that are going on and the achievements of our students and staff is central to what we do, and reminds us and reminds our community about our schools.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Clarifying on that, you're wanting us to come up with a protocol by which we're going to recognize students who are already being recognized? Like, is that something like that kid we recently saw who, is he a pilot or something?
So one of the, and that's one of the things that we had said, school events. So there are students who receive all kinds of recognitions. Maybe it's an Eagle Scout recognition, that would be a large recognition, but that's an outside of school thing. So really things that are school related events. I'm looking across at Jeswin, and I think the work he's done recognized nationally on the farm to school movement. So something that happens in conjunction with the school. We've had many state champion athletic teams. If students achieve a state level recognition like that, we would bring them to the board. So that's somewhat of my suggestion, but I would not want to impose my thinking on the board.
I think that's a good idea. I think more highlights about what we're achieving here it's always going to help the community more. Our papers are thin, our newspapers, the best parts come from the schools. So I think it's a great idea. I don't know what the protocol should be, but.
Go ahead, Kim.
I would be curious to hear from the student reps about what kinds of recognition would be meaningful, do they think, from the board? Would it be something you could hang on your wall? Would it be being invited to a meeting? What are your thoughts about what would matter to students and make them feel recognized and seen and appreciated?
Obviously, like from a lot of recognition that we have at Harwood, a lot of it's through like academic like scores and grades. I think it's a good idea to like implement that like other achievement, I guess, in a form of an award. That would be nice. But yeah, there's just a lot of concerns that it's only through grades, so through other students.
So what you're saying is it would be nice that it isn't necessarily academic based. Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
And a clarification, and then a thought, is this just for the high school students? So grades 9 through 12. And then also, I don't have a problem actually, if it's something outside of school, because I think that it's still a school community, even when you're outside the school. And, getting your Eagle Scout actually is a pretty good accomplishment. And if you're a student here, that not many students are doing that. Not to get too political with Boy Scouts, and I think scouting in general, I think is what you're supposed to say now. But anything, if someone got their pilot license or something, that's a pretty good achievement from out, a student that may not be school related. So I think we should certainly consider that.
I think our thought is district wide, so it's not just the high school. Go ahead.
My question is, as someone that only sees through highlight newsletters what's going on in the school, how would we identify and find these students to recognize?
And this is something I've done before. So that's one of the suggestions I have. Principal, I let principals know. I keep tabs on that. And sometimes you do see things that are in the newspaper where a board member will say, oh my gosh, we have students who've been recognized for the state level chorus. Can we bring them in? And that's something that it's just, I think once you know something, you can recognize it. And the only reason I suggest some criteria is because there's a lot of things that occur that are wonderful. So we don't want to exclude students. So it's always good to have some kind of benchmark by which we would convey that recognition.
I'll go to Jake and then Jonathan.
I do like what Kim had to say about potentially putting the onus on the student representatives to come up with criteria across the school and across our district communities for how we could potentially recognize these achievements, because I think the students will have the best idea of, where these achievements are happening. They'll be aware of them. So I would suggest, putting the onus on the students to do that.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I would double up what Jake just said. I think the student reps are a perfect vehicle to get those instances of exceptional action to us where, and then what they might miss, the principals of the various schools or even teachers could forward us information to the board in general or to the chair or to the student reps. And, we could have a variety of channels coming in from various directions, sports team coaches, et cetera. And we could put it out there that all of these avenues are open to suggest to us as a board to recognize one particular student or a group of students who have done something that somebody found exceptional. Maybe they went and did some charity work and picked up trash somewhere, and somebody noticed it. What are these kids doing? They're not smoking pot or doing bad things. They're doing something good. We should mention it. And I think we should open that up to the community as well. I think that's how we would involve the community more in our schools, is to make sure that they're aware of, hey, we want to know when kids are doing great things, whoever it is.
Ashley, and then.
Just wanted to say I agree with Naomi. I think the point's been made. It doesn't have to be academic and it doesn't have to be sports. There's leadership, there's people who, all the great clubs, there's a lot of different cool things. So multiple layers would be good.
Sounds great. I'm trying to figure out how often these awards, do they come spontaneously as something is noticed, or are there particular times of the year when these recognitions are given? And what kinds of, and might there be themes to the awards?
And that's all something that could come up when protocols are developed or yeah. Does that, you want to go ahead? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I did have a question on that. How much money we get? Like, can we hold like banquets? Like, can I get like a gold plated plaque? Like, I mean, because like going on your question, yeah, like, all right, gift cards. Like, I mean, yeah.
Well, I think it's more than that. It's the board's undying gratitude. Yes.
Well, we could
Yeah.
probably urge some people in the community to make donations for gifts to exceptional students, and those could be divvied out at the end of every semester or something. I'm just saying, after we've compiled a list of all the exceptional students that we've recognized, and we could see what was in the pot from the community.
Yeah, that does sound like a good idea. And we'd definitely be able to take on the project of finding these students and getting in touch with like coaches or like teachers, principals, club leaders. I'm also part of Student Gov, so we do have connections with, so I think we can probably make that happen.
I'd be happy. Get a Google Doc and we can share and just do it. Then we can talk when I'm in.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I really like Jonathan's comment. I think that I remember when I was at Harwood, there was a program where it was all academic based. So ours would be the more modern version, but local businesses gave certain, one was like a pass to Sugar Bush, one was like, $5 off at a restaurant or whatever, like gave little incentives for students that were made a certain list. And so we could do something similar with students that were in this award. And, no student wants to be invited to a 6 p.m. board meeting to get recognized. Like that's definitely not an award that anybody wants. But we could get creative. And I just want to reiterate, like, thinking about ways to pick up the students that maybe aren't getting recognized often would be a really important thing. I think the kids that are excelling at athletics and academics probably aren't the kids that really need the recognition the most.
Lisa, you mean the free candy at the school board meetings wouldn't be enough to come for? Come on.
I remember like back in middle school when we had the letter grading, I had gotten like high honors because like I had like A+ or something, and I got like a free dozen bagels at Casey Bagels. I got like, yeah. So I mean, just maybe not making it like solely academic, but like I mean, maybe I remember in middle school also we had like these wizards like on Crossbrook. I was on the Wizards team. I mean, this was like on the team. This was like just among the teachers, but they like recognize the student being kind, like, oh, you went and charged your friend's Chromebook, or you helped them pick up after themselves, or you gave them a high five. Like those, it was really low stuff. But if there's students who are like, doing those activities like community service, like charity work, like those that wouldn't really get, seen, I think definitely like having some kind of either community connections to incentivize these kinds of actions and to maybe also invite them to a board meeting. Keep it interesting.
I just want to support that last piece that you said, Jeswin. And I think what Naomi was alluding to, just like, it sounded like at the beginning of the conversation, we were saying like things that are already happening and just kind of an extra recognition. But this part, a few of the comments have tended towards, let's actually move away from sports and grades. And I just want to put my support around that, just recognizing acts like you were mentioning and things that aren't always quantifiable or recognized traditionally. Yeah.
So it's sounding like the board would be interested in an array, all the things from like what you mentioned up to sports or academics. So it's a huge wide field. Is that the sense? What?
I was just saying I would rather just stay away from sports and academics because they're just kind of traditionally already recognized, and look for things really.
Like that also skew toward just high school students. Like I don't feel like elementary school students are like, upcoming NBA athletes or gonna go play like soccer, right? And also like, I don't think middle school students are like curing cancer or being like, I mean, I feel like because we're trying to not just involve high school students, right? Like, I think definitely like sports who should be like, recognized, academics being recognized. It does happen already, but for like the lower grades also, if they can get involved, giving them some love, that'd be helpful too.
Okay, so it sounds like Dr. Mike and the students kind of have something they're going to be working on. Just throw something together. Okay, excellent.
That was very helpful.
That was great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the added discussion item, which is the respiratory illness / COVID, which we have about 20 minutes for. So did you want to go ahead and lead that off? Okay.
So
sorry, Cindy, you have your hand up? Sorry.
Yeah, I do. Life can go ahead, but I just wanted to say something. 2 weeks ago at the board meeting, when Life mentioned that that there was a policy for head lice, I was just nonplussed. I couldn't believe it. And I'll just reiterate how much I know head lice is a huge issue for families and school nurses in particular, and definitely needs to be thought about. But I thought that we had a policy for head lice and no other policy for any other specific contagious ailment or communicable disease was a little bit odd. And it made me think, and I got thinking about that maybe what we need to think about as a board is having a policy for communicable and contagious diseases or of some sort like that,
We have a wellness policy, but that's very different. That's about sports and health classes and stuff like that. Whereas this would be a policy that might specify for generally for if you have any kind of a communicable disease or a contagious issue going on, there's a team at the school, and that's mostly going to be your school nurses and your new school nurse leader and stuff would be dealing with it. And then you would have procedures for specific issues. So there would be a procedure for head lice, because you need to have that when you're talking about checking kids' heads. You need procedures that involve parental okay and stuff like that. But if you have COVID, you also have procedures for mitigation and maybe communicating what's going on. And I thought tonight's discussion about having this meeting was interesting because we weren't sure what this discussion would be about. What is it that we're hoping to either gain as a board from this? What kind of communication or what kind of action as a board do we need to be taking? And that would be perhaps for COVID, that might look different than the procedure for head lice, but it might also be that we would have a procedure. Right now we have this respiratory syndrome going around. I don't know if we need a specific procedure for each specific disease, but a procedure for when there is a communicable disease. What do we as a board do to be a part of that? And what do we need to be hearing from the school administration, health team and otherwise about what's going on? So we might have stuff that would say we would want to know what kind of mitigation stuff we were doing, what kind of communication we were doing. And then I had mentioned this to Mike, and he found that sure enough, the School Board Association has just such a policy. It's quite interesting, actually. So I think that I just like to suggest that we as a board think about having or developing or creating a policy that would be about communicable diseases in general, and what our policy as a school district is regarding those types of events and incidences. So that was just a thought I had, and I'm not sure. Policies are, that we don't know. We know they take us forever. We have to discuss it, then we have to recommend it, and then it's on an agenda for one time a year that we do policy approval and stuff. It's a complex thing to create board policy, and it should be. I think that's okay. But the procedures that can go under a policy are maybe a little bit more specific and easier for us to develop. So that was just something I wanted to throw out there as an idea that I had for how we begin to deal with this, because I think the COVID issue has raised it a lot. Where what is our role as a board around COVID? What is our role around communicable diseases in general? And where do we go from there? Thank you all.
Thanks, Cindy. Go ahead, Leif.
Want to say something? I saw your.
I was just going to clarify that the policy that's currently in the board's policy is actually not recommended anymore. The VSBA has recommended that it be deleted. It's actually exclusionary, and it's runs contrary now to the American Academy of Pediatrics. So I've had some discussions with the nurses, and that would be one that I'd recommend we delete. I would also say I'm always familiar with having a board that has a policy on infectious disease, and that's when Cindy had a discussion with me. There is a model policy from the Vermont School Board Association that I think is a good policy, and something that would be worthy for the board to consider.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Mike. And in talking to you, you made me aware of that policy and helped me find it, because I was like on the wrong page and clicking on the wrong things. So I appreciate that. And through my clicking around, I was in contact with VSBA, and I actually talked to them today about the policy just to get a little bit more background. And it's interesting because it was approved in March of last year, March 17th. And essentially she said, this is the assistant executive director, that they did it as a replacement for, they were going to create a COVID policy, essentially. And they realized they already had an HIV policy. And so kind of like exactly what Cindy said, they said, well, maybe this should be broader and address a number of policies. So if anybody's interested, it's in their model policy manual. It's F27. It's called Communicable Disease Mitigation Measures for Students and Staff. So it lists HIV, it lists COVID, it lists several communicable diseases. And she just kind of talked me through how, you know, they met with lawyers, they met with insurance risk people. It's a recommended policy. Other districts have adopted it. It's still current. They don't have a plan to change it. So from VSBA's point of view, they're like, yeah, this is a good starting point for you to think about policy. And if we did adopt it or look into it, she said, you know, you might want to actually just consider getting rid of your HIV policy because it's basically included. So just looking at it from my point of view, it feels like a lot of the things that we've talked about in the sense that it kind of states a goal for what we care about around this stuff. It's really focused on safety of staff and students. You know, it does say in there that the district admin team should create procedures. You know, if they've worked out that this is a policy, not a procedure, it hits all the legal requirements, and the fact that Mike found it and says he supports it, it feels to me like that would be a possible way forward for us.
I'll include that in my follow-up so everyone has access to view that recommended policy.
Go ahead, Jake.
So I've been thinking a lot about this since you gave that initial presentation, or the one that I witnessed first when I was sitting here for the first time. I want to discuss COVID transmission from a higher level for a second. From my perspective, there are three major ways that COVID transmission is hopefully prevented. The first one was remote learning, and you could also include social distancing tactics within the building itself when learning was occurring back in the buildings. So that's one of them. We have clearly moved on from that now, as everyone knows. The second one is COVID testing if someone tests positive, and I figured they would require a negative test result to return to school, but from what I understand, that might not be the case. Yeah, that confused me, I'll admit. But or contact tracing for that matter. All the hoops that we jumped through with contact tracing was another somewhat preventive measure to curb COVID transmission. And then the third one, which is easily, in my opinion, the most important one, is masking, two-way masking, mandated masking within our schools. Again, I guess this is just my opinion, but I do not think we're ever going back to that. Even if we had the ability to go back to that, a significant portion of our communities in this district would be very upset if we ever mandated masking in schools again. So without those three major preventive measures, I'm struggling to see a reason to spend very much time discussing this. I don't think there are many options out there for us. Again, masking is the most important way to prevent COVID's transmission, and that's not coming back from my perspective. You know, I understand this is somewhat political, but you know, vaccination is the way that we move forward with COVID, and that is family choice, of course, and individual choice, but that is ultimately going to be the answer. And as we continue to vaccinate this entire country, hopefully the disease will move toward an endemic state, and that's where we're at. I just fail to see a way that we could really come up with any genuine strategies other than that policy implementation. I was curious about that. That could be something, but I can't see a way this will make much of a difference moving forward. I know some people are tired of this conversation. I'm personally still concerned about COVID. I mean, seeing the hospitalization rates are, you know, they're still pretty high. It's rough. I mean, this is affecting, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in this country still. And unfortunately, I think we have our hands tied behind our backs. We have to listen to state legislature. Remote learning is not coming back. Mandated masking is not coming back. I fail to see a reason why we continue discussing this.
It's going to be Christine, then Tori, then Lisa.
Yeah, pretty much the only way I would support moving this discussion forward or any action would be through a policy adoption. I think it's ludicrous for this board as a body and its members to try to present themselves as some sort of medical professionals. And as a parent, it would have very little credibility in my eyes. And I would have no interest in respecting the authority of the board to make that decision. Our job is budget, policy, governance. It's not medical decision-making. And I actually think that, I think we're already at 20 minutes. And I think this is just a tremendous waste of time because we're completely off the rails.
I'm good. She pretty much articulated my thoughts very well.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I guess I want to challenge that a little bit, or just maybe voice. I don't think that two-way masking is never an option again. I think personally, I would love to avoid it whenever possible. I think if we get to that point, then that is still an option that's on the table and should be used by our school district. So to just say that that's never coming back doesn't really strike true to me. I agree. I think going through policies, the best way that we can as a board shape moving forward. I also just, again, want to, personally as a parent even, I would love to just know that our nurse and administration team have a plan for what happens if things get to more and more serious levels. It's not that I think things need to change right now. It's just that I want to know that we have a plan for if and when we need it. So as a board, I think that we could ask for that to be presented for that to be either created, or if it's already created, to be presented to us and to the public. I think that there's many parents that are and community members that would like to hear what's going to happen in our district over the winter if things get bad, and hopefully they don't. We don't have to use it, but we want to have it if we need it.
I said this before, I'm just going to repeat it. None of us are public health professionals. We have them in the state and they work with the AOE and they make recommendations. They have been doing that for the last 3 years. And I think it would be incredibly arrogant and irresponsible of us to start making public health decisions when none of us has the qualifications to evaluate whether whatever study we think is pertinent is valid or reliable or done in a way that whatever. It's just none of us are qualified to do that. There are people who are. They're advising us. That's what they're paid to do, and we should listen to them.
Anybody want to talk before I go back to Tori? Anybody not gone yet that wanted to go first? Okay, go ahead.
I would like to propose that we move forward with this topic with the plan that we adopt the updated policies that are recommended by the SBA. And maybe going forward, once those policies are adopted and we have somebody actually in the head nurse position, we can ask them to come up with a procedure. But I think just adopting the policies should be it.
Just to address a couple things. The thing about whether we're qualified to make decisions, I think I understand that from a certain standpoint, because this is like super high stakes, super high expertise, medical stuff on one hand. On the other hand, we're a lay board. So, we're none of us necessarily have to be experts even in education to be on this board. So this is the democratic process, right? We're coming here as a deliberative body to think through things as best we can and try to figure out what makes sense. In part, that requires that we hear from the district leadership, what plans are in place, how's it going? And to our best of our ability, we can say, that sounds generally good. That sounds like it's in line with the goals we've set together. So it is, I think if policy is the mechanism, that's great, but setting goals and then asking to be able to kind of like see procedures, see a plan, and possibly hear back over time in a data evidence driven way, I think that's our role. And part of my frustration this year has been that I've been asking since day one, since the first meeting, and we still haven't really had any transparency around procedures, the data, the question about what's being collected, there's still schools in our district that when you when you say that your kid's out, it doesn't say anything about COVID. There's no way to actually even record that data. So at this point, we're getting, kind of vague, oh, COVID's going well or not, but we don't even know what that means. So that's just like a kind of basic level of transparency and diligence that without us like understanding, the scientific literature per se, we should be able to provide. I think it's our job. So that's just one piece. I think, what Jake was saying, like, I'm not sure how this will make a difference. I think that, you named some of the tools, and I totally agree with you. Like, I think that that's part of what's really hard about talking about this is like, it's traumatizing, right? We're all like, no, I do not want to go back to masking all the time. I do not want to go back to lockdowns, et cetera. And just recognizing that a lot of those things are not likely to even be on the table whatsoever. But again, due diligence wise, just to like think from a policy standpoint, and if people look at that model policy, it just mentions stuff. It says, consider these things when you're making your procedures. And the district might come back, admin team, Mike's already mentioned like contact tracing is a no-go anymore. Like we are actually not allowed to do that. So just kind of like, again, for them to do the due diligence and us to see that transparently, there's things like air quality, again, data collection, the way things are communicated, those kind of procedures that could make differences, making testing available. And then as Lisa said,
we only have a couple more minutes left.
Okay, thanks.
So is there any last comment? Anybody? Just like a minute, 30 seconds. Yeah.
Live, I do agree with there does need to be some kind of structure in place. And maybe there is, and I'm just ignorant of it, but I was shocked to see that you don't have to test negative before returning to school. Like there are just these interesting policies in place, or that rather might not be in place. So, on that note, that was shocking to me. There needs to be some kind of plan for when there are these outbreaks in schools. This winter could be rough. I've seen projections where I work. They give a huge presentation on it because of the industry I work in. And it's a possibility that it'll get really bad. And there does need to be some course of action. I mean, maybe it exists. I've never seen it. And I just wanted to say that, I do expect there to be more steps in place, particularly with preventing the transmission of COVID and just figuring out some kind of course of action is what I'm trying to say. I think that there is some work to be done there.
So is it that the board wants to see that that recommended VSBA communicable disease policy? Okay.
Just to ask, what is the procedure?
This is like life's third time talking, and it's Robert's rules. Everyone talks once before anybody talks twice. And if not anyone wants to talk, everyone wants to talk once, then it's over and we move on. And you're not supposed to be commanding the conversation and taking up all the airspace. It's really not fair.
A clarifying question? What is that? You gotta use the microphone.
I'm just wondering what that means by adopting the policy, because I heard the idea of adopting it as is, and then I know that often there's like a committee and there's some sort of look at it. And talking to VSBA today, she was telling me that, you know, the recommendation is that somebody from the board, it could be the whole body or a smaller group of committee, sort of looks at the language and thinks about how to tailor it to our needs. I would be in favor of the latter, of having a smaller group of us spend a little time, maybe bring in.
So we can put it on the agenda to have a discussion how to handle it. Does that seem reasonable? Okay. We are going to move on to action items.
I'm sorry, I don't want to ask again, but just
Point of order. This is not okay. This is the third time that this has come up in a meeting off the cuff and has dominated the conversation just because one member wants it to. And I feel like that is inappropriate. And you allocated 20 minutes for the conversation.
I have a question that I think is germane because of the way things happen today in terms of timing. So you just mentioned that it would come up, and I'm just wondering if there's anything about timing that us as a board, as a body, would like to know.
Honestly, I'd have to look at the whole agenda to see when agenda planning to see when it can come up. I don't know life right sitting here right now. It could be next meeting. It could be the meeting after that. I don't know. I have to look at what we have. We're going into budget season. Okay. So we're going to move on to action items. And the first one is going to approve the superintendent goals. So I would be looking for a motion, and we do have a suggested motion. Kelly's going to bring that up. And to approve the superintendent goals, I believe is the suggested motion. We're just going to get the tally sheet up.
I'll make a motion that we approve the superintendent goals, which are academics, budget, community relation, and facilities.
And we will share that out, the tally sheet, I mean. There was a second. Is there any discussion? Because the actual whole listed goals were in the board packet. We just thought it would be too much to put all the wording up there. No discussion. Did people want to see the goals as listed out? Feel good to vote? Okay, we can go ahead and vote. Okay. Is there any objection to approving the superintendent goals in, sorry. It's her first day. Is there any objection to approving the superintendent goals in academics, budget, community relations, and facilities? Not seeing any or hearing any, that motion will pass. Approved goals. The next one is going to appoint board members to the superintendent evaluation timeline committee. I would just need a motion. I know it was Lisa volunteered through an email. Is there anybody else that wanted to volunteer? I'll do it if nobody else wants to, or if nobody's not jumping up to do that. So there was a description in the evaluation. Yeah, there was. So we did bring it up in the last leadership report. He'd like to form a working group committee to define a superintendent evaluation timeline. He gave us an example of one at the retreat, so we would kind of model it after that. So I know Lisa had emailed me and volunteered. Is it Jake, you will? Did you want to, Kim?
I would be happy to help with that.
Okay, then you could take my name off of that then. Well, I just, I was going to do it if nobody else. I do, please, thank you.
I'll make a motion to appoint Lisa, Jake, and Kim to the superintendent evaluation timeline committee.
Okay, and we're just going to bring up the wording, make sure that that is correct. We're just doing wording, Zoom people, and then we'll share the tally sheet. Okay, so the motion is to appoint the following board members to the Superintendent Evaluation Timeline Committee: Lisa Mason, Jake Pittman, and Kim Laidlaw. Is there any discussion? Is there a can I get a second? Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Any objection to approving the motion as written? Okay, not seeing any or hearing any, that will pass. Let's see, the next one is to, this is for the Waitsfield kitchen. And we have suggested wording. So I would need a motion for that. Dory?
I move to approve
that up there.
The motion as written.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, discussion.
I was looking, as I read through it, I just wondered whether this had gone out to bid to other architects or what. Yeah.
The architectural firm is the architect of record, so it is a process by which we could consider other professional services in future years, but the problem with that, generally speaking, with school construction is once you have an architectural firm who invests a lot of time and understands the project, usually if you jump to another firm in the middle of a project, it costs more money.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Mike.
Once again, I just wanted to say that I'm not against the project. I am voting no for it, only because I think that we need to give Mike more time to jump in. I also think that this project doesn't really have anything to do with improving the delivery of education to our students. We have a business manager who has previously indicated our reserve fund is low. And my philosophy right now, until we let Mike do his work, is if a roof is leaking, why have a new kitchen? Let's start with the most important stuff first. And if we're going to take money out of the reserve fund, let's have it going to something that can improve the delivery of education, not something that's just nice to have.
I'm just going to counter that. I believe that there's a plan to attend to the roofs. And I think we all know that for the most part, as Ray said, that the roof can't be fixed until we have a bond. In the meantime, this does affect the delivery of education. I don't know if you've ever known this, but our chef Jocelyn does refer to the cafeteria as the largest classroom in the school. And there's a lot of inconveniences and issues with the systems and the way it's currently done. And I think it's really unfortunate that there seem to be people that don't think that the kids at Waitsfield School deserve what they have at all the other schools in the district.
I just wanted to weigh in that as someone who works in a school and understands the day-to-day challenges every day of working with students, I think anything that we can do as a board to make the environment less of a hassle, less difficult for any of our schools, if we have that ability, I think we should. And I do support this. I think Waitsfield does need a commercial kitchen. They're one of our elementary schools, and food is an important part of everyone's day at school.
Jake, did you have a comment, Ashley? After?
So this is coming from my project management background, but there is so delivering value incrementally and fast is a very key project management tool that has only increased in popularity over the last 30 years. I understand that we have a leaky roof, but that is a gigantic repair, and this is a more manageable, faster to be delivered plan to provide value to our school district, and I think the community at large will respond positively.
Just want to support it in that I think that it's long overdue at Waitsfield. And also it does deliver value. The building will be forever improved. The global footprint of driving dirty dishes back and forth from Facein to Waitsfield will end. And I think that's crazy. So I am for this.
I guess I'm the school quality kind of question. I'm impacted a bit by the letter that came in, which seemed to suggest that it would decrease the quality at another school at Facein. And so, well, I mean, that's what it stated, and it was signed by a number of people. And so it's not just like doing something better for this school. It seems like it is a trade-off that maybe we're decreasing the quality in another school. I don't know enough about it to really look into it, but I think we should, take that into account. I also think that, my own understanding is still I don't quite understand how the maintenance reserve fund works, and whether these are trade-offs or whether it's really just money we can grab from. I don't know, at least maybe you could speak to it, but I did look at the 3-year plan and noticed like a couple of things. One, I was confused why there's more money allocated for this year, next year than it seems like we actually have. So those numbers seem to look like we're going to spend down all that money. So that was kind of confusing to me. And then also under this year for Waitsfield, there was a $200,000 line for the kitchen, which is now $550 plus. And there was also a $400,000 roof, which I think when people are talking about the roof, they're not talking about that roof. And there was a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know if this is like we're trying to figure out priorities, which brings us back to what Mike was saying about the more comprehensive plan that we're hoping for. And so if Lisa wants to speak to financials, but my other question is just like, when will we know more about that? And what are we losing by waiting to hear, more broadly the plan for facilities?
We can both chime in on that because it's directly under Lisa, but I've had a lot of experience with school construction. What I would say with the capital maintenance plan, we've talked about the process. We have a process that Lisa and I were not part of, and we have our own ways that we would like to work with the board on that. So one of the ways that Lisa and I have discussed is as she works together with Ray on that capital maintenance plan for future years, she wants to make sure that she's meeting with school principals, getting their input, so that principals can share that information with their buildings. That's a piece that may not have been consistently, I don't know, may not have been consistently followed, but in relation to the question about the Facein staff, I did visit that building and the person who sent us the letter and have a meeting set up to sit down with that faculty. So we plan to have a more comprehensive process and take a look at that. But there are some elements that would be potentially in a bond. There are some things that are ongoing capital maintenance, and that's a piece that Lisa and I will work on. And if you want to jump in on that.
The maintenance reserve is consists of prior year funds over the years and is built up. Right now, it will be over $4 million. I don't have the exact figure because some things are coming in. In fiscal year 21, there was over 1.5 million voted on to be able to put into the maintenance reserve, which happened in Q2 this year. It wasn't represented in my Q1 report. So there is over $4 million in that. there were a lot of things in fiscal year 23 that were budgeted to happen over the summer. And as we reported, a lot of things, several things did not happen because of vendors, supplies, things like that, and they've been pushed off. I'm working on developing, updating the 3 to 5 year maintenance reserve projects for the next several of years, which we'll then present and share with you guys. Right now, I'm meeting with principals and Ray to be able to develop that list, to be able to share with you guys. But this funding for this scope of project for the kitchen, the $6,000 that you're voting on right now, would be to develop construction designs, engineering, architect, and construction documents for us to then to be prepared to go out to bid if we want this to happen over the summer. It's a tight timeline and the best time to do this, so it's not impacting the students while they are in school, is over the summer. And to do that, we have to have those construction documents pretty quickly. And you know, we have to meet, design it, engineer it, go out, make sure we're meeting the permitting and design scope, and then gather all that information, go out to bid, and depending on what the bids come back in, we then have to make a decision, and then there's lead times on a lot of things, so a lot of components that go into it.
Lisa, go ahead.
I'm going to support this motion. I think it's important that all of our schools have a commercial kitchen at their location. I am sensitive, or I took that letter that the Facein staff wrote to heart too. And so I guess my hope is that as we move forward with having the ability to cook at both schools, Facein and Waitsfield, that we can figure out a way to really build up both food programs instead of making it feel like we're taking away from one and giving to another. I think that having the assets at both schools should make that possible. And so I think we need to go into it intentionally with that as the goal.
Did you want to?
He was going to talk for the second time. We had this discussion last month and it's been 5 minutes. Our last meeting.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and vote.
I'm not sure. Are the times like set in stone? I don't feel informed enough to vote personally yet. I'm just interested in.
We discussed all, like, I mean, I feel like I'm having deja vu of the discussions that we had last meeting to the repeat discussions and questions that are being raised tonight. I thought this was an action item, not an agenda discussion item, and we are here to vote on it.
Okay, let's go. Let's vote. Ashley.
Voting yes.
Bobby.
Yes.
Christine.
Yes.
Jonathan.
Yes.
Jake. Lisa.
Yes.
She said yes. Do you want to take Marlena out there? She's up. Marlena would be next, but she's absent. I'm sorry, Cindy. Sorry.
Yes.
Life.
Abstain.
Who's next? Tori. Kim.
Yes.
Mike.
Absolutely no.
And Kelly. Okay. You want to scroll all the way down? Okay, that's going to pass. Okay, so our last action item is to appoint Laura Titus as treasurer for the remainder of the fiscal year, along with the prorated stipend. I just need to. Okay. Is there a second? Okay, we're just going to bring up the tally sheet so everybody that's on Zoom would be able to see that. Just one second. That looks good. Okay, any discussion on this? Yeah, that's why I asked. Do you have, go ahead. I put down 5 minutes. Nothing. Anybody else? Is there any objection to the motion? Not seeing any or hearing any, that will pass. So there is one thing in the consent agenda. The minutes have, what?
There's a typo in the consent agenda, and I just wanted to make sure it got changed. I wasn't, yeah.
And with the minutes, we need to pull that out because the minutes tally that was recorded with the motion for the COVID discussion, the incorrect amount was recorded, the percentage. Sorry, it's just.
There's another error as well.
What?
It's at the bottom and it has to do with dates. It's just 2 dates are double. There are 3 dates at the bottom and one of them is typed twice. I have to go to it.
So let's start with the minutes. We need to correct the in the minutes from the last meeting.
Where are the minutes?
Okay, so if we go down to yeah, so it should be yes for 45.5% and no was 26.70%. It just got Carol just took down the, I think it was the majority or the whatever it was.
And then the other, I think error, I wasn't here, but it says approved board warrants from 9/28/22, 9/28/22, and 10/12/22. You've got 9/28 twice.
What? On this one? What do you look, which one?
Okay, sorry.
Oh, that,
Yeah,
okay.
it's just, it's either 3 dates that should be different, I would think, or one of those shouldn't be in there. But I wasn't here, so I don't know.
Yep, okay. So just need a motion for those corrected. No, we have to pull those out to fix those. Right. Correct. In the consent agenda. No, we want to do minutes. Carol, go ahead.
I just went back and looked at the agenda and that's the way it was in the agenda. I didn't notice it when I copied it down. So 9/28 was in there twice. So I think the correct answer is it should be just 2 dates.
Thank you. So we're going to amend the minutes. Yes, we have to. Oh, so to change the tally for the COVID respiratory illness / COVID tally. We're just getting the wording correct, guys, just so we can get those minutes correct. And remove the second 9/28/22 date under board warrants. So that's the motion. Is there anyone who wants to write it as, does that make sense? Anybody want to make that motion as written? Kim?
I make a motion that we amend the minutes to change the tally percentage on the COVID mitigation motion to 45.45% yes and 26.70% no.
Is there a second for this? Okay.
I didn't read the whole thing, I don't think. Okay.
She's gonna screen share it.
Oh, cool.
There you go.
And remove the second 9/28/22 board words.
And Tori seconded it. Is there any discussion on this? No. Okay. Any objection to approving the amended minutes as written up here? Okay. So then we will approve the consent agenda, including the amended minutes. As amended. So is there a second? Okay. Is there any objection to approving the consent agenda with the amended minutes as I do? Okay. Okay. If not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. The last thing is just communication. Kim, you're going to write it. Tori, you're going to edit it. I don't think there's anything extra to add. Okay. So I would be looking for a motion. Second. Okay, all those in favor? Yep. Okay. We will see you guys next week. The board packet will be going out on Monday, not Friday. Have a great rest of the week.